Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Cindie Chavez. Today is Wednesday, May the 1st, 2019. It is 4 p.m. in New York. It is 1 p.m. in Los Angeles. It is 9 p.m. in London, and it is 6 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. But wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I just got an interesting note. I'm not sure if we're still on Facebook. It looks like it may have failed on the stream. I'm going to double check that to see if that's true.
Oh, no.
It has been an interesting time. We switched over to Zoom so that we could do live streaming to Facebook and or to YouTube. And YouTube's been giving us a heck of a hard time. And now it turns out that Facebook is giving us a hard time. So I don't know. I think it's like what Linda Armstrong keeps telling me. Our energy is just too big, Cindie. I mean, the electrons just can't keep up with us. That's all there is to it.
Just never know. I have no idea. The stars are just not aligned. I don't know.
I don't know either. I'm going to try one more time just to see if I can get it live streaming to the Facebook page so that people on Facebook can tune in and follow us. But the good news while I'm doing this is that it's Neville Day. Happy Neville Day.
Neville Day. Happy Neville Day. Happy May Day.
Happy May Day, yes.
1st of May, yes. It's amazing.
It's something that doesn't get celebrated as much anymore by a lot of people, does it? I mean, May Day, when was the last time you ever saw a maypole, for instance?
You know, I actually did see a maypole in the past couple of years. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was really cool, yeah. But you're right. We don't think about it. And the other thing is that it's amazing to me that it's already May.
Tell me about it. No kidding.
Wow, how did that happen?
What happened to the first third of the year?
Right? Exactly. Crazy.
Oh, it is crazy. It's unbelievable. But, that just means that our now is in a new place. And that's the way to look at it, I think, is, the now is always current, right? So,
exactly.
the date just kind of slides by. We say, oh, there it goes. Goodbye.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And that's talking about conscious creation and law of attraction. And, you have those moments where things turn out so great and you're able to, experience synchronicity and wonderful things happening. And when that happens, it's because of alignment. And alignment always happens in the present.
Yes,
right?
It does. Absolutely.
So that's our now is really important because that's where everything is happening, because the past is just a memory and the future is uncertain. And so we got to be here right now.
It's the only place to be. It's the place to be. So thank you.
I'm excited about May.
Yeah.
And about Neville. And I've been editing audio almost all morning until it was time to be here.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. And I have to say that I didn't have any glitchiness.
Good.
Yeah. And I kind of had a moment of, wow, I'm really getting really good at this, right?
I love it.
Well, it's only because, I've been doing it a long time and you start to understand the programs and it starts to be second nature instead of that learning curve of like, right. Oh my gosh, how do I do this? But the thing that was funny, and I just laughed about it, was that I do all this recording in my office and I have these two big windows. And I know that occasionally during the podcast, you'll hear like traffic sound or something, a siren go by or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it just feels like, it seems like whatever hour that I spend recording, it's that particular hour that every big truck in the world is going to do.
Of course it is.
As much noise as possible. And at some point, I just shook my head. Every time it happened, I just stopped talking because I know I'm going to edit it out. But it's just like, la, 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 just stop talking and
when I was first starting to do the podcast 6.5 years ago, and for the next few years, I was obsessed with every time there was some sort of background noise that came in or, something didn't work right or whatever. And what I didn't realize is that in the process of doing that, I was actually setting myself up for more stuff to be obsessed about.
Right.
But in the course of learning about all of that, I kind of like reached a point of no return where I just didn't care anymore.
That's what's happened. I mean, I always know that I'm going to edit it to a degree to where I run through the whole thing a couple of times. I listen to it, I edit it. It's fine. Mm-hmm. But the first few times I edited out every tiny little thing that you don't notice. And I was so persnickety about it. You know, for a 30-minute recording, I would spend 4 hours editing it, pulling out every little thing. And then one time I had purchased like a course or something from somebody, and I'm listening to it and I'm taking my notes. You know, it was just like a class on something, and she's talking, and all of a sudden I hear in the background like, you know, I'm like, oh my gosh, here I am worrying about a pin drop, and this recording has a freaking rooster, and it's like, okay, I'm just not going to worry about this anymore.
Oh, that's great.
So now when it happens, I just laugh and I take a breath and I wait for it to stop, and then I keep recording, and then I edit out what I can, and you know, it's all good.
It is.
Sometimes we just take everything too seriously, right?
No kidding. No kidding. Yeah. Well, in a sense, that's kind of what I have been doing with trying to get the Zoom thing straightened out. I mean, yesterday I was obsessed with it. I was just, I was frustrated. Like, oh, why didn't this work? I'll try it this way, try it that way, so forth. And I finally said, well, this isn't getting me anywhere. Why am I doing this? What's the point? You know, if this can be ironed out, it's going to be ironed out anyway. You know, it's not going to get ironed out by me getting all upset about it.
Right. Oh.
So why not just take a breath? And so I did. And I took the rest of the day off.
That's a really good way to do it. Let go of that resistance.
This is actually good information that I'm getting here, because as we're talking, I just tried to restart the live stream in Facebook, and I did restart it, and it dropped out again. So I've got information to pass along to the Zoom folks. So here's another example of how I don't have to do any more fixing. All I have to do is just find this, report it, and I'm done.
That's it.
That's cool. I like that. Yeah.
Just turn it over to the manager.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this case works for Zoom, but nevertheless, yes, I turn it over to the manager.
Isn't that what Abe says? Is just turn it over to the manager.
That's right. Exactly.
Perfect. Well, should we dive into some Neville?
We should. And I'm noticing we're almost done with this book. This is the longest book that we've tackled.
We are.
We're almost done with it. Like,
we're almost finished. We are on chapter 24 as of now, and that's amazing.
It is. It's cool. It's fun.
Yeah, and it's been so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I saw the title of this chapter, I was like, ooh, because it's clairvoyance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that there are a bunch of different facets to what we usually just call intuition, I guess.
Right. I'm
really curious to see where Neville's going to go. As usual, Neville...
I just need to point one thing out. I mean, we've been doing a lot of chapters that were about like the triune God, and about circumcision, and about the crucifixion and Easter and Christmas and so forth. And now all of a sudden we're on clairvoyance. And this is in the same book. And I mean, how many books do you know of that go through that kind of transition? That's a pretty rare transition. Right.
Right. Well, there was one point when we were maybe, I want to say within the last 3 weeks. So in the last maybe 5 chapters, where I'm reading, and all of a sudden Neville mentions to dare, to know, to will, and to be silent. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? Like, that's like the power of the Sphinx. That's like something that has to do with, you know, ceremonial magic. And I'm like, okay, that was Neville. Like, Neville's all over the place.
He really is, yeah.
And, you know, something that I think is really cool about Neville is, at least from where we sit now, I recognize that he wrote this stuff a long time ago. He was in a completely different, really, society has changed so much, right?
Oh, yes.
Societal norms and, you know, our culture and everything. But he didn't seem to really care whether all of his stuff fit anybody's sense of what was usual or normal or traditional or mainstream. And he put things together that other people might not have ever put together. And he was very unique in that sense. And I think that's a great, you know, example for us, is that we can think outside the box. I think Neville was really an outside the box thinker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely was.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's like, then all of a sudden we get to a chapter and it's called fishing.
Yes, right.
I particularly like that one. So this one is called Clairvoyance. And as usual, Neville starts out with a scripture from a verse from the Christian Bible. He says, having eyes, see ye not, and have ears, hear ye not, and do ye not remember? He goes on to say, true clairvoyance rests not in your ability to see things beyond the range of human vision, but rather in your ability to understand that which you do see. A financial statement can be seen by anyone, but very few can read a financial statement. The capacity to interpret the statement is the mark of clear seeing or clairvoyance. That every object, both animate and inanimate, is enveloped in a liquid light which moves and pulsates with an energy far more radiant than the objects themselves. No one knows better than the author, but he also knows that the ability to see such auras is not equal to the ability to understand that which one sees in the world around about him. To illustrate this point, here's a story with which the whole world is familiar, yet only the true mystic or clairvoyant has ever really seen it. Synopsis. The story of Dumas, Count of Monte Cristo, is, to the mystic and true clairvoyant, the biography of every man. Edmond Dantes, a young sailor, finds the captain of his ship dead. Taking command of the ship in the midst of a storm-swept sea, he attempts to steer the ship into safe anchorage. Commentary. Life itself is a storm-swept sea with which man wrestles as he tries to steer himself into a haven of rest. 2. On Dantes is a secret document which must be given to a man he does not know, but who will make himself known to the young sailor in due time. This document is a plan to set the Emperor Napoleon free from his prison on the Isle of Elba. Commentary. Within every man is the secret plan that will set free the mighty emperor within himself. 3. As Dantes reaches port, 3 men who by their flattery and praise have succeeded in worming their way into the good graces of the present king, fearing any change that would alter their positions in the government, have the young mariner arrested and committed to the catacombs. Commentary. Man, in his attempt to find security in this world, is misled by the false lights of greed, vanity, and power. Most men believe that fame, great wealth, or political power would secure them against the storms of life. So they seek to acquire these as the anchors of their life, only to find that in their search for these, they gradually lose the knowledge of their true being. If man places his faith in things other than himself, that in which his faith is placed will in time destroy him, at which time he will be as one imprisoned in confusion and despair. And that's a really interesting statement, right? Because most people are telling us to have faith in God, have faith in a higher power, have faith in, something outside of ourselves that's bigger than us.
Right.
Neville says if man places his faith in things other than himself, that in which his faith is placed will in time destroy him.
Yeah.
So he goes on to tell the story. 4, here in this tomb, Dantes is forgotten and left to rot. Many years pass. Then one day, Dantes, who is by this time a living skeleton, hears a knock on his wall. Answering this knock, he hears the voice of one on the other side of the stone. In response to this voice, Dantes removes the stone and discovers an old priest who has been in prison so long that no one knows the reason for his imprisonment or the length of time he has been there. Commentary. Here behind these walls of mental darkness, man remains in what appears to be a living death. After years of disappointment, man turns from these false friends, and he discovers within himself the ancient one, his awareness of being, who has been buried since the day he first believed himself to be man and forgot that he was God. 5. The old priest had spent many years digging his way out of this living tomb, only to discover that he had dug his way into Dante's tomb. He then resigns himself to his fate and decides to find his joy and freedom by instructing Dantes in all that he knows concerning the mysteries of life and to aid him to escape as well. Dantes at first is impatient to acquire all this information, but the old priest, with infinite patience garnered through his long imprisonment, shows Dante how unfit he is to receive this knowledge in his present, unprepared, anxious mind. So with philosophic calm, he slowly reveals to the young man the mysteries of life and time. Commentary. This revelation is so wonderful that when man first hears it, he wants to acquire it all at once. But he finds that after numberless years spent in the belief of being man, he has so completely forgotten his true identity that he is now incapable of absorbing this memory all at once. He also discovers that he can do so only in proportion to his letting go of all human values and opinions. As Dantes ripens under the old priest's instructions, the old man finds himself living more and more in the consciousness of Dantes. Finally, he imparts his last bit of wisdom to Dantes, making him competent to handle positions of trust. He then tells him of an inexhaustible treasure buried on the Isle of Monte Cristo. Commentary. As man drops these cherished human values, he absorbs more and more of the light, the old priest, until finally he becomes the light and knows himself to be the ancient one. I am the light of the world. And then 7, well, that was 6, that section we read before. 7, at this revelation, the walls of the catacomb which separated them from the ocean above cave in, crushing the old man to death. The guards, discovering the accident, sew the old priest's body into a sack and prepare to cast it out to sea. As they leave to get a stretcher, Dantes removes the body of the old priest and sews himself into the bag. The guards, unaware of this change of bodies and believing him to be the old man, throw Dantes into the water. Commentary. The flowing of both blood and water in the death of the old priest is comparable to the flow of blood and water from the side of Jesus as the Roman soldiers pierced him, the phenomenon which always takes place at birth, here symbolizing the birth of a higher consciousness. 8. Dantes frees himself from the sack, goes to the Isle of Monte Cristo and discovers the buried treasure. Then, armed with this fabulous wealth and this superhuman wisdom, he discards his human identity of Edmond Dantes and assumes the title of the Count of Monte Cristo. Commentary. Man discovers his awareness of being to be the inexhaustible treasure of the universe. In that day, when man makes this discovery, he dies as man and awakes as God. Yes, Edmond Dantes becomes the Count of Monte Cristo. Man becomes Christ.
That's fascinating on a number of different levels. The first one is, we know, I'd still like to know more about him, but we know that Neville received his teaching from a Middle Eastern mystic named Abdullah. And I'm wondering, do you think that Abdullah and Neville discussed the Count of Monte Cristo?
I have no idea, but I'm never going to look at that story the same way.
Well, also, as we were reading it, I'm reminded of what Monte Cristo means.
What does it mean?
I'm pretty sure it means the mountain of Christ.
The mountain of Christ.
So, when you're first hearing or reading what Neville is saying about the Count of Monte Cristo, it sounds like, once again, Neville's kind of doing one of his really interesting, wild stretches of here's what was originally there and here's what he's interpreting it into. But then you recognize the name, the Count of Monte Cristo, and what that actually means. And you say to yourself, that's not all that far off, is it?
It's really not. And it really does, his parallel, it never really moves too far from the story. I mean, I think it's a pretty good metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It really is, yeah.
And I've never heard it before, so I was kind of like, really? Certainly heard the story. I think, like he said, it's a story we all know, but I had never heard this kind of explanation of it. So
now there's also a law of attraction thing going on here for me, because this is a story that I did read many years ago. I was quite young when I first read it, and then I forgot about it for literally decades.
Right.
Literally decades. And I know movies have been made and, plays have been written and so forth that kind of played off of it, but I was ignoring it. I wasn't paying any attention to any of that stuff. And so it was not literally part of my life. In the past few years, I've been, my wife has been watching it a few times, one of the movies that were made about the Count of Monte Cristo on cable. And I've been seeing that a few times. And then it came up, what was the other context? There was another context it came up in very recently. And now here we are talking about it again. So we have this cycle going on. I've been thinking about it and I've been getting interested in it. And as the interest has grown, more and more opportunities to explore it, to discuss it. And now we're into left field with it. And it all makes sense. It all makes sense. That's what's so cool about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Now I kind of want to watch the movie.
It's a good movie too. The latest one that I saw, I think it was made in the last 10 years. It was well done.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the old movie.
There is the old one, yeah. The new one is good. I mean, it's a little bit of a modern take, but it's still pretty good. And I'm almost interested in watching it again and watching it with the idea of looking at Neville's commentary during watching the movie.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to see, okay, well, how does this match up?
Yeah, I'd like to follow it all the way through and see if it matches.
Because I mean, certainly the synopsis matches. That definitely matches what I remember of the story. So.
Well, so speaking of something we all know, the next chapter 25, is the 23rd Psalm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, even people who aren't Christian, people who aren't religious, people who, it's like this, it's in movies, it's in books, it gets quoted all the time. If you go to a wedding or a funeral, you may hear it. Like, it's all over the place. So I'm really curious to see what Neville's going to do to it.
Well, as I'm kind of skimming here, I mean, the 23rd Psalm is a really relatively short psalm as psalms go. And the commentary is like 4 or 5 times longer. So this is going to be interesting.
So I think we're going to Neville'ize the 23rd Psalm.
We are, yes.
So let's see. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Neville says, my awareness is my Lord and shepherd. That which I am aware of being is the sheep that follow me. So good a shepherd is my awareness of being. It has never lost one sheep or thing that I am aware of being. My consciousness is a voice calling in the wilderness of human confusion, calling all that I am conscious of being to follow me. So well do my sheep know my voice, they've never failed to respond to my call, nor will there come a time when that which I am convinced that I am will fail to find me. I am an open door for all that I am to enter. My awareness of being is Lord and shepherd of my life. Now I know I shall never be in need of proof or lack the evidence of that which I am aware of being. Knowing this, I shall become aware of being great, loving, wealthy, healthy, and all other attributes that I admire.
Now, I want to stop for a moment there, because when I look at the original line from the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Yes.
And in Christian circles, that has a very specific meaning. Do you get the impression he's using that second part of the phrase to mean something different? I shall not want. I mean, it seems to me that he's talking about something quite different there.
Well, I've always understood it to mean I won't be in lack.
Right.
I won't be wanting for anything.
Right.
What do you think he is saying?
That's partly what I'm trying to get my head around. But he says in that second paragraph, my consciousness is a voice calling in the wilderness of human confusion, calling all that I am conscious of being to follow me. So well do my sheep know my voice that they have never failed to respond to my call, nor will there come a time when that which I am convinced that I am will fail to find me. I get the feeling that section there is his way of interpreting I shall not want.
Well, he does say, so good a shepherd is my awareness of being. It's never lost one sheep or thing that I am aware of being. So it's sort of like, I don't want for these things because I am. Like my shepherd, my awareness is so good. It's never lost any sheep or any things that I am aware of being. So that I think that's the I shall not want.
Well, if that's the case, and I think you're making a good case for that, then the I shall not want isn't so much not I shall not lack. It's rather What I have and what comes along with I am is with the analogy of the sheep, and I'm having trouble turning that sheep into what it is that he's saying.
Well, it's like he's talking about, I don't want to say he's talking about
it's awareness of being. That's the phrase. It's awareness of being. Yeah. So
right.
So I shall not want is I shall maintain my awareness of being.
Yes. And that's why I said I don't want to really say identities, but in a way, because that makes it sound like we have a million identities, and maybe we do, but it's the awareness of being, that none of those things that we're aware of being ever are lost. We are aware of being them. And once we can tap into the idea of that I am, then we go to his last paragraph here where he says, knowing this, I shall become aware of being great, loving, wealthy, healthy, and all the other attributes I admire. It's the awareness that is the shepherd, and it is not losing the sheep. What are the sheep? The sheep are all of those things we're aware of being. And those are there we don't want for.
Yeah, there it is. Our sheep are all the things that we are aware of being. Yes. Now we got it. Okay.
Okay. So he maketh me to lie down in green pastures.
Okay.
Neville says, my awareness of being magnifies all that I am aware of being. So there isn't ever an abundance of that which I'm conscious of being. It makes no difference what it is that man is conscious of being. He will find it eternally springing in his world. The Lord's measure, man's conception of himself, is always pressed down, shaken together, running over. So I think this is interesting. And what it reminds me of is things in our life that are magnifiers, because he uses this word, my awareness of being magnifies all that I'm aware of being. It's kind of like a circle, because I'm aware of being, and it's my awareness of being that's magnifying all of these things. But you know, one of the things when you talk to people around money and wealth and all those ideas that we get caught up about having money, having wealth, having abundance, is especially in people that have decided that a certain segment of the population, namely people that have great wealth, are bad people. And if people that are wealthy are bad people, then none of us people who want to be good people are ever going to want to be wealthy, because we don't want to be bad people, right? So we're going to keep it at arm's length from us. And one of the things that I have come to think is a really good explanation is that money doesn't change who we are, it just magnifies who we are. So if we're generous already, it's not going to turn us into, you know, someone who's stingy or greedy. If we're generous already, we'll even have more to be generous with. If we're already, you know, a miser, then we'll have more to hoard. It'll magnify that part of it. If we're creative, then we'll have more resources to create even more. It just magnifies whatever we are, right? And so he's using this idea, saying that the awareness of being is what actually magnifies all the things that we are aware of being. I think, and he says here that it doesn't matter what we're conscious of being, whatever it is, we will find it eternally springing in his world. I think that's a good analogy because we do see it pops up everywhere. Whatever it is that we're conscious of being is the way we view the whole world. So we see it everywhere.
Let's go back to the original psalm, verse 2. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Now, I understand what you were talking about here, but how does that tie into the phrase, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures?
Well, if you're a sheep, I think that's a pretty good life. If you're a sheep, you want to be in a green pasture, not a brown one. You want to be somewhere where there's an abundance of whatever it is that you need. So I think that's the parallel that he's drawing there, is that there is an abundance of it. Same with he leadeth me beside the still waters. he says, there's no need to fight for that which I'm conscious of being, for all that I am conscious of being shall be led to me as effortlessly as a shepherd leads his flocks to the still waters of a quiet spring. And, you know, there's a level of trust here that he's kind of not mentioned directly, but I think sheep trust their shepherd to lead them. And so there has to be a certain level of trust of our own consciousness, of our own awareness, of the power of that, and of the, you know, ability of us to lead ourselves.
I'm realizing there are still a number of areas of confusion for me where this is going here. I mean, I get the gist of what his message is, but I'm still trying to tie it into what the original psalm says. And some of that still doesn't quite click. I need to go back to the first verse. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And he starts off by saying, my awareness is my Lord and shepherd. That which I am aware of being is the sheep that follow me. I want to look at those two sentences again. My awareness is my Lord and shepherd. That which I am aware of being is the sheep that follow me. What exactly is the difference between awareness and aware of being? What's the difference?
Well, it's my awareness and that which I'm aware of being. So the things that you are aware of being are those things that he lists a few paragraphs down. Great, loving, wealthy, healthy. So if I am healthy and I'm aware of being healthy, then that health is one of the sheep that follows me around. Health follows me around. If I have a conscious aware of my, a conscious awareness of being wealthy. Have you ever heard someone talk about someone like that? Like, oh, this person is just, you know, everything they touch turns to gold, right? Wealth just follows them around like a sheep because they're aware of their consciousness of being. I think that's what he's getting at.
So basically what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to encode the Neville decoder ring. I'm trying to draw parallels.
Here's the thing is, I think that there are times when Neville forces things. And because I don't take anybody's word as gospel, including Neville, I recognize that as far as I'm concerned, sometimes he may just be pushing a metaphor and trying to get it to fit. But I think this one's fitting fairly well.
Okay, well, that's fair. You know, I'm just thinking about that concept, the awareness being the Lord and shepherd. Basically, he's talking about consciousness there. Lord is one of his words for consciousness. Right. So my awareness is my consciousness. My consciousness, my awareness, that is God. That's Lord. That's the reign. That's what's reigning overall. And then that which I'm aware of being, the sheep, that's all of the aspects of my consciousness as I choose to express it. That's all different forms of expression that I come from, that I put out there, coming from my position of I am. So, okay, I can go with that. Yeah. And so like he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Well, the maketh me part, he's really deviated from dramatically, but I can live with that. Lying down in green pastures, he has, he's, like you said, he's talking about an abundance there. And I guess in a sense, we can say that if he maketh me, if that refers to my consciousness maketh whatever I am aware of being to lie down in green pastures. If that's what he's talking about, he's basically saying, well, one follows the other. Okay, in that sense, it's maketh, I guess. So I can live with that. And then he leadeth me beside the still waters. Now, the still waters, that's the part that's still not quite working for me yet. So I look over to his explanation, and he talks about he will find it eternally springing in his world. And I hear the word spring in there, and I see still waters, and I say, okay, there's a mixed metaphor going on. What's he actually driving at here?
You know, when he says, his commentary about still waters is kind of interesting, because he said there's no need to fight for that which I'm conscious of being. Right. For all that I am conscious of being shall be led to me as effortlessly as a shepherd leads his flock to the still waters of a quiet spring. So I think he's kind of talking about, I mean, the verse seems to talk about peace. Right. And so he says there's no need to fight for that which a lot of times we struggle and push for things because we don't have the consciousness that we are that already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what he's saying here, is that if you're conscious of being that, if you really have an awareness of that being in your consciousness, that identity, then you don't have to struggle to be that thing. You are that thing. It's like, I don't go around struggling all the time and fighting to prove to myself that I am a wife or a mother or a woman or a coach. I am those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm conscious of being those things. So there's no fight. It comes to me as easy as, Now, there may be other things that I want to be, but I haven't been able to assume the consciousness of being those things yet. And so I would struggle to say I was those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So,
I mean, that's just my take on Neville.
I think it's a good take. I think you're quite accurate. Yeah, I think you've got it pretty good. I wanted to make sure we went through all that because he can be really, really out there with his analogies. So we have to make sure we're really drawing all the lines.
Well, this one here, I mean, he restoreth my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Neville says, now that my memory is restored. Now, this is interesting because the verse says he restores my soul. And I don't know who can define soul. One of my favorite ideas is actually a quote from Sue Monk Kidd, where she says, if I'm asked what does the soul do, my answer is the soul does two things. It loves and it creates. I think that's a pretty good definition of the soul. I always think that the soul of a person is what makes them unique. It's where our creative abilities come from. It may have to do with our personality, but there's definitely that authentic, unique part of us. He says, now that my memory is restored in the place of soul. Mm-hmm. And I think he's talking about knowing that he is God, right? Yeah. So that I know I am the Lord. Mm-hmm. And beside me, there is no God. So he says, my kingdom is restored. So his take on he restores my soul is he brings back the realization, he restores my memory so that now I know that I'm the Lord. Yeah, he says, my kingdom, which became dismembered in the day that I believed in powers apart from myself, is now fully restored. Now that I know my awareness of being is God, I shall make the right use of this knowledge by becoming aware of being that which I desire to be.
So I would say that he equates soul with self-knowledge.
It sounds like that to me.
Yeah, I think so too. And that makes sense also. That fits the Neville motif to a T. I mean, that's literally where he comes from. He comes from that basic position, I am. We've been talking about that in this book earlier on the book. That I am is the primary, it's the first starting place where everything emerges from.
So he says to wind that section, now that I know my awareness of being is God. I think that's the restoration he's talking about. Mm-hmm. And then, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. His commentary says, yes, though I walk through all the confusion and changing opinions of men, I will fear no evil, for I have found consciousness to be that which makes the confusion. Having in my own case restored it to its rightful place and dignity, I shall, in spite of the confusion, outpicture that which I am now conscious of being, and the very confusion will echo and reflect my own dignity. That one we might have to tear into a little bit.
I think so, yes. The valley of the shadow of death actually translates in his description to the changing opinions of men.
And confusion.
And confusion, yes.
So he says, I will fear no evil. He translates, I will fear no evil. Now here's where he goes with this. The original verse says, for thou art with me. I'm not going to feel any evil because I know you're with me and that your rod and your staff are comforting me. Mm-hmm. He says, I'm not going to fear any evil because I've found consciousness to be that which makes the confusion. Now, I'm curious about that. Because he goes on to say, having in my own case restored it being consciousness, restored my consciousness to its rightful place and dignity, I shall, in spite of the confusion, outpicture that which I am now conscious of being. I think what he's saying here is that the way that consciousness makes the confusion is that we become conscious of being and we're conscious of not being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's confusing to say I am this in consciousness and then not see the evidence of it. Where's the evidence? And so he talks about that. He says, the very confusion will echo and reflect my own dignity. So I think it's that idea of stepping into a certain identity that you are conscious of. And sometimes there's confusion around whether that thing is really happening or not. Mm-hmm. That's all I can take from that. I don't know. Maybe you have something different.
I think that's pretty good, actually. I'm still intrigued by the original phrase from the Psalm, the valley of the shadow of death, because he's translated that into the confusion and changing opinions of men.
Right.
And, you know, I can say there's a lot to that, because certainly, well, it depends on how you take the word opinions, I guess. But when opinions can often be used as a weapon, as a way of, you know, beating somebody above the head and shoulders, or lording it over them, or, you know, in some way, using it in a way that's a not friendly way. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, yes, that does create a kind of a death, or a shadow of death anyway. Because it basically puts a limitation, a very strong and severe limitation on creativity. And we just identified that, you know, this concept of, let's see, how does he express it? I don't remember exactly where he expressed it, but the concept of the soul, essentially, which we were talking about in the previous section.
Yes.
The soul being the creator.
He says, my memory is restored. Right.
Right. There it is. Yeah. Well, that, the blinding of that, the blocking of that is a kind of death. I mean, when you don't have your creativity, you're dying. There's not a whole lot of life going on there. Creativity is it's as essential as breathing and eating and sleeping and drinking water. I mean, if you don't have creativity in your life, you will die.
So if he's equaling confusion with the changing opinions of men. So it seems that this is something that he brings up a lot, like what other people may say, the changing opinions of men, where he says here, I shall, in spite of the confusion, outpicture that which I am now conscious of being. So he's manifesting in spite of what other people say, in spite of all those other opinions. He is outpicturing, which is the beginning steps of manifesting something in 3D reality. He's outpicturing that which he's conscious of being. And he says the very confusion will echo and reflect my own dignity. Mm-hmm. So that makes me think that if he's making a parallel of confusion and the changing opinions of men, then the changing opinions of men, the things other people say, will echo and reflect my own dignity. And he's talked about this before, that once you become conscious in yourself of a facet of your being, once you become conscious of being a certain thing, other people will see it. So the opinions of men will echo his own dignity at some point. At some point, it will be seen and it will be manifest where people will be able to talk about it. That's what I think he's saying there.
Yeah, that's a good take on it. I like that. Now, there's also the last part of it where he says, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me, which he roughly translates into, let's see, where does it pick up? Having in my own case restored it to its rightful place and dignity, I shall, in spite of the confusion, outpicture that which I am now conscious of being, and the very confusion will echo and reflect my own dignity. The very confusion, that I think is the phrase that turns it. That's the turnkey right there.
Right.
Because
so,
no, I was just going to say, because that confusion ties in directly to the fear and confusion. To me, that's the parallel right there. Mm-hmm. So he's saying that confusion, that fear, ends up in a sense transmuting into the rod and the staff that comfort me.
Yes. And that it will end up echoing and reflecting his own dignity. That's
right. So when I take that, like if I compare that to, say, the Abraham scale, the emotional guidance scale, what I understand that to mean is, as I move myself from the part of the scale that I don't prefer to the part of the scale that I do prefer, all my power comes to me. It's essentially the same thing as what he's saying in that paragraph.
Right. And also, other people start to notice.
And other people start to notice. That's right.
And reflect it back to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Even in their
even in their confusion.
In their confusion.
And their changing opinions, they're reflecting it back to me.
That's contrast he's talking about.
Well, I think because, in other words, even in their changing opinions and their confusion, they're still reflecting back to me what I'm conscious of being.
Yep.
Whether they agree with it or not.
Yep.
Because when you are conscious of being something, you are that. I am. That's the whole story.
That's it.
So that's pretty powerful.
It is.
Then he says, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. His commentary. And by the way, that anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Sheep will get little stickers and bugs and things in their fur. And the shepherd will rub oil on their fur to get it out. And they will put their face into a cup of oil or water to kind of wash their face, right? So it's a goodness that the shepherd's doing to the sheep here. He's taking care of it. So he says, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Not sure what that means. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. In the face of seeming opposition and conflict, I shall succeed. For I will continue to outpicture the abundance that I'm now conscious of being. My head, consciousness, will continue to overflow with the joy of being God.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back to the original psalm, thou preparest a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. The psalm ties that back to the concept of the valley of the shadow of death. That's where those enemies are. That's where they come from. That's where they're confronted in a sense. And that's what the original biblical conception of the Lord, the shepherd, is leading them out of. So that's where the original story comes from. He's turned that into a story of consciousness, which he always does.
Right.
And in the story of consciousness, we've already identified part of that, the valley of the shadow of death. That was the confusion. It was the changing opinions of men. It was all the undesired side of the Abraham scale. It was the stuff that is scary. It was the fear stuff. It was all that kind of thing going on. And so now, if we understand in that context, the presence of mine enemies is that stuff. That's the stuff. It's
right.
It's the confusion.
He reiterates it again right there, right? He says, in the face of seeming opposition and conflict.
That's it. Yeah. So that part we got identified. Preparing the table, that ties into what you talked about how the sheep were originally treated by the shepherd. Mm-hmm. When the table here is a metaphor, very clearly. I mean, it is in the original psalm. So I think he just kind of assumes that the table is like, here's the foundation on which we're doing our conversation. That's really what the table is, And then anointing the head with water. He says, my head consciousness will continue to overflow with the joy of being God. So he basically took those two concepts, anointing and then my cup runneth over. He tied them into one thing.
Yeah.
So it's a little disjointed, but it's fascinating.
I love that he's just so forward about, you know, my consciousness will continue to overflow with the joy of being God. Okay.
Yeah.
Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. He says, because I am now conscious of being good and merciful, signs of goodness and mercy are compelled to follow me. Now, this goes all the way back to the very, very beginning. He's talking about my consciousness is the shepherd, and the sheep are the things that I'm conscious of being, right? So we were talking about if I'm conscious of being wealthy, wealth just seems to follow me around. If I'm conscious of being someone who always runs into great opportunities, great opportunities just seem to follow me around. So he says here, because I'm now conscious of being good and merciful, signs of goodness and mercy are compelled to follow me all the days of my life. For I will continue to dwell in the house or consciousness of being God or good forever.
So he answered part of my question in that last bit by equating God with good. My question was, because I'm now conscious of being good and merciful, why good and merciful? Okay, good, we got that answer. Good is God. Why merciful? What's merciful in this?
Well, I think he's just taking his analogy and the original verse, goodness and mercy shall follow me. So they're following him in his analogy of the shepherd being consciousness and the sheep being the things that we're conscious of being. In his analogy of that, if goodness and mercy are following him, it's because he's conscious that he is good and merciful.
Well, and there's an interesting mixed metaphor going on there, because he says that goodness is God, but he also says goodness is following him. So God is following him. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. It's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong or anything. I'm just saying it's a little bit evocative, because the very basic statement that he always starts with is I am.
Right.
And that I amness, if you will, is the basis of being God. I mean, he equates that very early on in the book,
right,
with being God. Okay. So if we understand it that way, it's Neville 101. That's right. So basically, to kind of translate this, God, by being God, by recognizing I am God, my godness follows me around. Godness becomes apparent. It is apparent that I have a godness going on.
I love it, right? It's like, that's powerful. Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah. Very interesting.
It is very interesting.
Pretty wild, too.
It's pretty wild. Let's see. So I'm watching the clock.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do we have time? I don't know if we have time. We could try.
It's a long one.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep the commentary to a minimum.
Okay. So let's see. Gethsemane. This is chapter 26. Almost to the end of the book.
Yeah, 2 left after this.
Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. A most wonderful mystical romance is told in the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, but man has failed to see the light of its symbology and has mistakenly interpreted this mystical union as an agonizing experience in which Jesus pleaded in vain with his Father to change his destiny. Gethsemane is to the mystic the garden of creation, the place in consciousness where man goes to realize his defined objectives. Gethsemane is a compound word meaning to press out an oily substance. Geth, to press out, and shemen, an oily substance. The story of Gethsemane reveals to the mystic in dramatic symbology the act of creation. Just as man contains within himself an oily substance which in the act of creation is pressed out into a likeness of himself, so he has within himself a divine principle, his consciousness, which conditions itself as a state of consciousness and without assistance presses out or objectifies itself. A garden is cultivated piece of ground, a specially prepared field where seeds of the gardener's own choice are planted and cultivated. Gethsemane is such a garden, the place in consciousness where the mystic goes with his properly defined objectives. This garden is entered when man takes his attention from the world round about him and places it on his objectives. Man's clarified desires are seeds containing the power and plans of self-expression And like the seeds within man, these two are buried within an oily substance, a joyful, thankful attitude of mind. So oil, in a lot of biblical, reference, especially that's poetic, is a metaphor for joy. So just pointing that out. That's not Neville. That's just my knowledge.
Okay.
Just like wine is often a metaphor for joy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As man contemplates being and possessing that which he desires to be and to possess, he has begun the process of pressing out, or the spiritual act of creation. These seeds are pressed out and planted when man loses himself in a wild, mad state of joy, consciously feeling and claiming himself to be that which he formerly desired to be. So he's talking about here the same thing he's been talking about, and that is being aware of you being conscious of a certain thing, being a certain thing, conscious of being. I am. Desires expressed or pressed out result in the passing of that particular desire. Man cannot possess a thing and still desire to possess it at one time and at the same time. So you've either got it or you don't have it. So as one consciously appropriates the feeling of being the thing desired, this desire to be the thing passes, is realized. The receptive attitude of mind, feeling and receiving the impression of being the thing desired, is the fertile ground or womb which receives the seed, defined objective. The seed which is pressed out of a man grows into the likeness of the man from whom it was pressed. Likewise, the mystical seed, your conscious claim that you are that which you heretofore desire to be, will grow into the likeness of you from whom and into whom it is pressed. Yes, Gethsemane is the cultivated garden of romance, where the disciplined man goes to press seeds of joy, defined desires, out of himself into his receptive attitude of mind, there to care for and nurture them by consciously walking in the joy of being all that he formerly desired to be. Feel with the great gardener the secret thrill of knowing that things and qualities not now seen will be seen as soon as these conscious impressions grow and ripen to maturity. Your consciousness is Lord and husband. The conscious state in which you dwell is wife or beloved. This state made visible is your son, bearing witness of you, his father and mother, for your visible world is made in the image and likeness of the state of consciousness in which you live. Your world and the fullness thereof are nothing more or less than your defined consciousness objectified. Knowing this to be true, see to it that you choose well the mother of your children, that conscious state in which you live, your conception of yourself. The wise man chooses his wife with great discretion. He realizes that his children must inherit the qualities of their parents, and so he devotes much time and care to the selection of their mother. The mystic knows that the conscious state in which he lives is the choice that he's made of a wife, the mother of his children, that this state must in time embody itself within his world. So he's ever select in his choice and always claims himself to be his highest ideal. He consciously defines himself as that which he desires to be. So we might have to wrap it there. I will make note. Or maybe we'll have to do the whole chapter next time again.
We might have to do that. That's all right. I mean, if we have to do that, I can live with that. That's not a bad thing. Because I think there is actually quite a bit to be discussed on this.
I think so too.
He has a lot of metaphor that we were kind of moving past pretty quickly, and I think he's discussing. So okay, we will do that. But that was worth it, though. That gave us.
Sometimes I do that with Neville. Like I'll read the whole thing all the way through, and then I'll go back and read it again because now I have sort of a picture, a frame, if you will, that I can start to pick it apart. So
yeah, it's there is layer upon layer upon layer upon layer in Neville. The layers just go on and on and on and on. I want to make one commentary before we close off for the day. I've been noticing I've been involving more in the Facebook groups that are Neville specific groups.
Right.
And one of the things I've noticed is that there is, I don't want to miscategorize or characterize it, but there's like there's a language and a culture around Neville that has kind of grown up in these Facebook groups. And I suspect it probably derives somewhat from whoever has been doing taking the lead role of teaching Neville's teachings. But it's an interesting dynamic because on the one hand, when we do our readings from the books, I get a really clear sense of all these layers of symbology, all these layers of metaphor and meaning. And it's almost like all these metaphors in the groups have been turned into, okay, here is the final structure. And the reason I take note of that is it sounds to me just like organized religion.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. I mean, when we look at, you're much more of a student of this than I am, but when you look at the original Bible, the original Torah, the original writings, and compare it to what it's been turned into, what it originally was quite different from what it's been turned into. It has been turned into a rigid, in a sense, it's like Neville's idea. You take the basic feeling and you harden it over time. It's been hardened over time into this one rigid thing. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But I think people often forget that when a structure is hardened, it doesn't last forever. It can't. In fact, a major portion of us as humans, as creators, as gods, is creating anew, building new structures.
Fluid, letting things evolve and change. And
exactly.
That's the thing that happens is when we set something in stone and we make it rigid and we decide it can't be different, it often turns into fundamentalism. And
whereas the joy is in the fact that it's fluid. The joy is in the fact that it's constantly evolving and changing and turning
even in his metaphor, what was the joy? It was the water flowing.
That's right.
Oil,
exactly.
It was fluid. It was not a rock.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. The more I kind of immerse myself into that culture to find out what's going on there. But I also have to admit, I'm going into it with kind of a grain of salt. It's like you told me before the podcast, don't drink the Kool-Aid. I'm trying to avoid drinking the Kool-Aid.
Right.
But the cool part is we don't need to have people interpret it for us. We can interpret ourselves. And that's what's so fun about doing this. So thank you for continuing to be our lead interpreter, our lead Neville decoder.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it so much. Before we go, remind people how to find Cindie Chavez, the life coach, because she's also a pretty cool person.
Yeah, they can find me online on my website, cindiechavez.com, CindieChavez. I would love for you to come find me, and there's a contact form there. Just give me a shout. Very good. Hopefully we'll get the live streaming thing fixed, or actually I'm not going to do that. Zoom is going to do that, and I'm just going to sit back and say hooray. So thank you, Zoom, in advance for clearing that up so we can be live streaming. But in the meantime, at least we get to do the recordings, and I really appreciate doing it with you. I appreciate our podcast listeners as well, because they're the ones who make all of this possible. We will see you all next. Absolutely. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everyone.